Hey there, fellow horse lovers. Welcome back to the Daily Ride podcast. My name is Morgan. I am your host, and today I'm excited to talk about Ulysses S. Grant. Why, you may ask, am I bringing up a United States president on this podcast? Because he was greatly influenced by horses. From his early childhood days through his military career, through his service as a United States president, horses shaped who he was, and he leaned on horses throughout his life as a sanctuary whenever he was struggling with immense stress or difficult times ahead of him. Horses also allowed him to pursue his dreams, and I think can be credited for a lot of his talent and development as a true leader and one that has served our country well. I'm excited to get into it with you and share the impact that horses have had on one of our greatest presidents. The Daily Ride podcast directly supports True Heart Healing. True Heart Healing is a nonprofit organization that I've founded with my horse, True Heart. We hope to leverage the healing power of horses and the joy of equine companionship for veterans, active duty service members, children with disabilities, and life-altering illness and their families to help them foster stabilizing relationship, find joy, facilitate learning and growth, and discover purpose in their lives. If this is something that you also would like to support, please head over to www.the-daily-ride.com to make a donation. I'm currently working on obtaining our 501c3 status, so every little bit counts. True and I are so grateful that you're here with us today. Ulysses S. Grant's affinity for horses began as soon as he was born, really. He was born in 1822 in Point Pleasant, Ohio, to his father, Jesse Grant, who owned a tannery or a hide shop. Unlike many boys of his time, Ulysses wasn't interested in working in the tannery with his father or pursuing any trade for that matter. Instead, he found that he much rather would be out in the barn with the horses. When he was a toddler, there's a story that a neighbor woman found Ulysses toddling around between horses' legs under their bellies and swinging from their tails. The neighbor woman was so alarmed that he could possibly be hurt, she ran and found his mother, shouting, "Mrs. Grant, do you know where your boy is? He's out there swinging on the tails of the horses." And calmly, Hannah, Ulysses' mother, would say, "Horses just seem to understand Ulysses." In fact, at the age of 5, apparently he liked being a bit of a daredevil or a trick rider on horseback. He loved riding as fast as the horse could go, and he would stand on one leg holding the reins, maintaining his balance as a horse galloped underneath him. It was pretty amazing to behold. By the time he was 7, his father was away for a day. Grant decided that it would be a good idea to try and tack up a 3-year-old colt that had never been ridden or saddled before. When his father came back later in the afternoon, he discovered that Ulysses had managed to bridle and saddle the colt. And not only that, but he had ridden him and amassed a pile of brush as big as a cabin all by himself. His father decided that this was a useful skill around the house, and by the time Ulysses was 8 years old, he entrusted him with the rather large task of hauling wood. He gave Ulysses a whole team of horses to go collect firewood and bring it back. This is a skill that is really tough to master. My mother and I went to a driving clinic earlier this spring, and even learning how to drive one horse in front of a cart is quite a challenge, and it is an art form within itself. So imagining an 8-year-old child managing a whole team full of horses and then using this team to go collect wood and bring it back home. That's a lot. But Ulysses rose to the occasion, and he managed the team of horses with such composure and so much skill that everyone that observed this could just tell he had a natural gift for horsemanship. And it wasn't because of his physical strength. He seemed to somehow understand and communicate with horses in a way that transcended any kind of physical contact. He had a good understanding of their temperaments, their moods, and how they moved. This connection with horses continued throughout Grant's childhood. By the time he was 11, his reputation for being quite the horseman preceded him. There was a trick pony that had traveled to town belonging to a local traveling circus, and this pony had been trained to throw off anyone who attempted to ride him. So, after watching several of the other boys in the town try and fail to stay on this pony, Ulysses came forward and said, "I think I can ride that pony." And he got on him. He had no reins, and the pony's mane had been cut short, so there was nothing to hold on to. Instead, Ulysses wrapped his arms around the pony's neck, and after frantic attempts to buck Ulysses off, the pony finally gave up and let Ulysses ride him calmly around the ring for a couple minutes. This earned Ulysses a round of applause from the audience, as well as the $5 prize that had been promised to anyone who could stay on the pony. Ulysses' talent and horsemanship may have caused some personal tension within his family. You see, Ulysses' father held a regard for horses that was more pragmatic. Being a tanner and a leather worker, horses to him were horsepower, manpower. They're a potential source for hides even when they were too old to be useful. And so, by contrast, Ulysses viewed horses as wonderful individual beings, each with their own spirit and temperament that he appreciated being around. In fact, he was so good at sensing this temperament and this individuality with horses that he was able to size up any horse that he had been working with. And this allowed him to best employ each horse to tasks that suited them. This talent would come to serve Grant well throughout the wars that he was involved in the military, as well as through the rest of his life. As Grant continued to grow up, his bond with horses only deepened. He became known for his incredible ability to ride and train horses and was often trusted with breaking the most difficult and stubborn horses with ease. Grant's father would often lend him out to the neighbors who had been having struggles with their difficult problem horses, knowing that Ulysses could handle almost any one of them. This reputation followed him when at 17, he enrolled in the United States Military Academy at West Point. And at West Point, Grant's skills were quickly recognized. His classmates and instructors were so impressed with him that they believed he could have easily pursued a career as a professional horseman if he hadn't gone into the military. And just as it had occurred when he was younger, cadets would bring Grant their unruly horses that they were having problems with for Grant to work with. Grant had a classmate named Ingalls who said of him, quote, "Grant could get along with horses not by punishing the animal, but by patience and tact and his skill in making the creature know what he wanted to have it do." End quote. West Point had many horses because horsemanship was an important part of the curriculum there. Among the stable of horses at West Point, there was a dark bay horse that was so difficult that it was about to be condemned from the school. Grant selected this horse to be his, and every day he would devote time to it, bridling, mounting, and riding it around with ease, while the rest of the class would watch and admire in amazement his excellent command of this horse that no one else could work with. In June of 1843, the cadets assembled in the riding hall for their final graduation, where all members performed their riding exercises before the superintendent, Richard Delafield, and a large assembly of spectators. The Academy riding master, Henry Hirschberger, approached the high jump bar, raised it another foot higher than the average man's head, and then called out, "Cadet Grant." From the class of cadets, Grant sprang forward, riding a large chestnut horse named York. The rest of the cadets in his class recognized York because, again, no one else was able to ride this horse except Grant. Grant moved to the far end of the hall, and he turned York to face the bar, and silence fell over the crowd. He dashed York forward, rated his pace, and with a great jump, York and Grant cleared the bar with ease. Hirschberg then cried out, "Very well done, sir," as the assembly room filled with applause. And in this moment, Grant had set a high jump record at West Point that would stand for the next 25 years. Albert D. Richardson, Grant's personal biographer, had once said of his horsemanship, quote, There was nothing he could not ride. He commanded, sat, and jumped a horse with singular ease and grace. He was seen to the best advantage when mounted and at full gallop. He could perform more feats than any other member of his class and was, altogether, one of the very best riders West Point had ever known." End quote. In fact, another one of Grant's classmates, the future Confederate general, James Longstreet, said of him, quote, "In horsemanship, however, he was noted as the most proficient in the academy. In fact, rider and horse were held together like the fabled centaur, and that he was the most daring horseman in the academy." End quote. General Rufus Ingalls later recalled that when an unruly or stubborn horse was added to the string of academy horses, they always would ask Grant to deal with it. After graduation, Grant naturally wanted to have his service be for the cavalry, but despite being at the top of his class and his excellent horsemanship, there wasn't any available opening in the cavalry, so he was assigned to the 4th Infantry Regiment, which was his second choice. Grant served in this infantry regiment during the Mexican-American War. During this time, he witnessed the wild Mustang herds that roam along the Rio Grande rivers. He described them as great herds of buffalo moving around in a continuous mass. Quote, "The country was a rolling prairie, and from the higher ground, the vision was obstructed only by the earth's curvature." End quote. Grant also estimated that to corral a herd of wild Mustangs of this size, an area the size of the state of Delaware would be required. Unfortunately, Grant would again be disappointed at his military assignments. He was appointed to be quartermaster of his regiment in August of 1846. Because he was very good at being organized and his ability to work with horses and managing teams of horses, he was put in charge of the mule teams that the Army was using at the time. He really wanted to participate in battle and share some of the responsibility of the dangers that came with it. And so Grant at first was very frustrated with this assignment because he believed it was beneath his ability. He even submitted a protest to his colonel, but he was denied. This new assignment of his involved loading and unloading and packing each mule correctly and efficiently, and making sure the mules were healthy and well taken care of and could continue to serve. Every 8 soldiers was assigned 1 pack mule, and Grant would have to inspect and manage up to 50 mules at a time, along with several 5-mule wagon teams. This was a pretty big undertaking and responsibility for Grant, who had never worked with mules before. So Grant decided to hire local Mexican mule handlers who were more familiar with working with mules, so Grant could observe them and learn to work with them better himself. Once, a volunteer was needed to carry an important package of reinforcements to the troops. Grant came forward and demonstrated his equestrian ability at the Battle of Monterey. He carried the package past snipers while he was hanging off the side of his horse at a fast gallop, keeping the body of the horse between him and the oncoming fire. Eventually, when the Civil War broke out, Grant was working at his father's leather shop back in Galena, Illinois. At the time, being a leather worker, or a tanner, the family had no need for a horse, and so Grant didn't own a horse at this time. However, during the Civil War, Grant would own and ride more than 10 different horses. Grant was appointed colonel of the 21st Illinois Volunteer Infantry on June 14, 1861. At this point, he realized he would need a horse, and so he purchased one while he was still in Illinois. It was a strong horse, but while he was working with this horse, he realized that this horse would be not a good fit for military duty. And so while he was camped on the Illinois River for a few days, a local farmer brought in a cream-colored stallion, a palomino, named Jack. Jack was very intelligent and had a lot of energy, and Jack proved to be excellent for going on really long marches because he didn't seem to tire. But again, he probably wouldn't be the best horse for battle. So because of this shortcoming, Grant started referring to him as Old Nuisance, but he was still pretty fond of Jack because he was so beautiful. He had dark eyes and a silver mane and tail, and so Grant kept Jack and often rode him during the campaigns of 1862 and 63, and kept him as an extra horse, especially for ceremonial purposes because he was so beautiful. Jack was the horse that carried Grant away from Admiral Foote's riverboat the night before the attack on Fort Donaldson, as well as the horse that endured difficult scouting missions in the Tennessee mud before and during the Battle of Shiloh. He also rode Jack to the Battle of Chattanooga, And after Chattanooga, Grant was called away and officially retired Jack to his personal business advisor in Illinois. Halfway through his time with Jack, Grant purchased a second horse that he called Fox. Fox was also very powerful and had exceptional endurance, so he would trade off riding Fox and Jack during the siege and battles around Fort Donaldson and also at Shiloh. On August 5th of 1861, Grant was appointed to be Brigadier General of the Volunteers. Soon after this, he had purchased a pony for his son, who happened to be traveling with him at the time, along with another horse for himself. Unfortunately, at the Battle of Belmont, the first battle that Grant was involved in the Civil War, this horse was killed out from under him, and so he had to use his son's pony. But the pony didn't really do well in battle either, and so he turned it over to his aide when he offered Grant to exchange for his horse. The Union advance had scattered the Confederates away from Camp Johnston at the time, but Confederates were soon regrouping, and they began to surround the Union troops. A lot of the officers were saying that they should surrender, but Grant was on this horse, reassuring and reorganizing his troops. In fact, during the final retreat, he narrowly escaped on this horse by leading it down a steep riverbank. Grant wrote, quote, "My horse put his forefeet over the bank without hesitation or urging, and with his hind feet well under him, slid down the bank and trotted aboard the boat 12 or 15 feet away over a single gangplank." End quote. You could tell, despite not knowing this horse very well personally, he had the utmost respect and appreciation for him. Perhaps the most famous horse that Grant had, and definitely his personal favorite horse, was Cincinnati. Cincinnati was a bay, and he was said to have been 17 two hands. He was a son of Lexington, and Lexington at the time was considered to be the fastest thoroughbred in the United States. Grant considered Cincinnati to be the finest horse he had ever seen, and on rare occasions only allowed 2 other people to ever ride him. One of these people was Abraham Lincoln. Grant once said about Lincoln, quote, "Lincoln spent the latter days of his life with me. He came to City Point in the last month of the war, and he was with me all the time. He was a fine horseman and rode my horse Cincinnati every day." End quote. In October of 1862, a month before the siege of Vicksburg got underway, Grant had sent Jack back to Illinois for a month rest. Knowing how much Grant relied on his horses and the fact that he still prioritized sending his horses back to be able to rest and recuperate speaks volumes to Grant's deep understanding and appreciation of the equine species. Not many other generals of the time would do that. During the Vicksburg campaign, Grant acquired a different horse captured by a raiding party at a plantation in Mississippi. He had the opportunity to ride this horse, and he found it had a delightful gait. So he purchased the horse from the army and named it Jeff Davis, which was a nod to the Confederate president, Jefferson Davis. So he rode Jeff Davis instead of Cincinnati when there was a long journey to be made, because Jeff Davis had more endurance than Cincinnati did and was a little more sure-footed. Grant definitely still had spills and accidents. Those of us who own horses know that accidents and falls are not a matter of if, but a matter of when. At one point during the Civil War, Grant had suffered a really serious horse-related injury while visiting General Banks in New Orleans. According to Grant, he was on a horse named Charlie, who was a nice horse but wasn't used much, so he was pretty fresh. And while he was reviewing Banks' troops for him, a train in the street sounded its whistle and spooked Charlie. Charlie took off and stumbled and fell on Grant's leg. It knocked Grant out cold, and he came to in a hotel room several hours later with doctors looking over him. His leg was swollen from his knee to his thigh, and he described the pain as being almost beyond endurance. He was bedridden for over a week, and he had a hard time even rolling over by himself. Eventually, they put him on a steamboat and took him back up the Mississippi River to Vicksburg, where he was able to spend some time recuperating so he could move around on his own again. In December of 1863, while still in Chattanooga, Grant was given a Kentucky thoroughbred as a gift by the citizens of Egypt, Illinois. They knew Grant was in need of a new horse after he had officially retired Jack. So Grant wrote a letter of thanks to the citizens of Illinois and named his new gift horse Egypt in their honor. Egypt was 7 at the time, and he was extremely handsome. He was also a dark bay, and he was 16 hands tall. Egypt proved to be invaluable in the months to come, since Grant had to travel so much over ice and snow-covered terrain in January. He also used Egypt throughout the Overland Campaign in Virginia. However, at the end of the Civil War, at the surrender of Appomattox, Grant met with Robert E. Lee at the picket lines between armies, and Grant chose his favorite horse, Cincinnati. There, the two generals sat on their horses talking for hours, Grant on Cincinnati and Lee on Traveler. They discussed the terms of the surrender of the South, and Lee requested that his officers be permitted to leave with their horses. Grant, understanding that many of the Confederates relied on farming and agriculture as their means of their livelihood and their survival, understood what this meant and agreed to let the Confederate officers leave with their swords, their dignity, and their horses. When Grant then became president in 1869, 3 of his horses, Cincinnati, Jeff Davis, and Egypt, were brought to the White House with him. According to Albert Hawkins, the stable master of the Capitol at the time, Grant had arranged for a statue of him sitting on Cincinnati to be sculpted. And for almost a month, the general would have the bridle and saddle put on Cincinnati, and he would ride out to meet the sculptor daily. He also noted that Grant's other horse, Jeff Davis, was a kicker, and he had the habit of biting anyone when anyone would get close to him. Despite this, Grant was able to handle Jeff Davis without any problems as soon as he walked in the stable. Jeff Davis would lay his ears back and move about restlessly until Grant would approach him and calm him down with a couple of strokes on his back. Grant once refused an offer of $10,000 for Cincinnati, which at the time was an incredible amount of money, but instead opted to keep Cincinnati and always kept him close. Nearly all depictions of Grant on horseback in any drawings, granite, and bronze are always astride Cincinnati, including the Ulysses S. Grant Memorial in Washington, D.C. After the Civil War, Grant had also gained possession of Whitehaven, which had been previously owned by his wife's brother, Frederick Tracy Dent. While Grant was president, he transformed this estate into a successful breeding barn and assigned it as a beautiful large horse stable with room for 25 horses. All of Grant's horses were either received as gifts or purchased by Grant himself, and he mostly owned thoroughbred horses as well as Morgan horses, but he enjoyed raising other breeds as well. But he would never race his horses. He never attended any horse races, and he thought the practice of horse racing for amusement was cruel for the animal. Not to say that Grant wasn't a bit of a speed demon himself. He remained involved in equestrian activities during his presidency. In fact, there's a particularly funny account of him racing his carriage on city streets in 1872 when he was then arrested by a police officer for speeding on 13th Street. The police officer's account of the events can't be fully verified, but it's generally accepted that Grant had to pay a fine and had his buggy impounded. So suffice it to say, President Grant's relationship with his horses wasn't just about his professional life, it was personal. President Grant was known for his calm demeanor and his deep empathy, not just with people, but also with animals. Throughout the Civil War, he was known to stop and care for injured and exhausted horses that he came across on the battlefield. He hated seeing animals suffer, and he never allowed any cruelty to come towards them while he was in their presence. This empathy that he had led him to arrest a carriage driver who was beating his horse while Grant was serving as president. Horses also were President Grant's escape. During both the Civil War and throughout his presidency, Grant had a lot of responsibilities and faced overwhelming stress. Being able to go out and ride gave him a reprieve from those pressures. When he was in the saddle, he was able to clear his mind, recenter, and reconnect with the peace that he found with his horses and out in nature. In fact, during his presidency, he was known to slip away for hours at a time to go ride in Rock Creek Park in Washington, D.C., sometimes reporting that they would go up to 30 miles away. Grant's connections with horses continued until his death. In 1885, Ulysses S. Grant died at the age of 63 after losing his battle with throat cancer. His coffin was pulled by a team of 24 black stallions arranged in 12 pairs along Broadway in New York City, while 20 generals, led by General Winfield Scott Hancock, also on a black stallion, led the entourage and team of horses. Something tells me that Grant wouldn't have had it any other way. The bond between President Grant and his horses went beyond his skill and talented horsemanship. It seems as though, throughout his own accounts and the accounts of those who knew him, that his connection with his horses was built on trust and empathy and an understanding of each other. He was gentle, and he understood deeply how individual horses are, and he was careful about choosing horses that were well suited for the tasks that he would assign to them. Understanding each horse's temperament and personality this way reflects, I think, inevitable truth about good horsemanship. And that's that force and fear and asserting dominance doesn't yield any kind of lasting results, whether that's leading one horse or a team of horses. And I would argue it applies for leading armies and people and countries. Grant's leadership was based on mutual respect and understanding. This led him to his amazing ability to calm horses, relate to them, and also help them realize their full potential. And this mirrored his leadership style. Grant was known for being quiet, composed, and resolute, and he trusted his horses as much as they trusted him, which I think is a testament to the extraordinary transformative power with the horse-human connection. Ulysses S. Grant's legacy as a horseman, I think, is an important part of his larger story. His horsemanship wasn't just a hobby or a skill. It was who he was. It was an expression of his character and a key to his success, both as a general and a leader of our country. The horses he loved and rode, Cincinnati, Jeff Davis, York, Fox, Jack, Egypt, and others, all played a unique role in this greater story of his life, and each stood as a symbol of resilience, strength, and deep empathy. Thanks for joining me today on this episode of the Daily Ride podcast. I really enjoy learning about history, especially the history that horses have helped us write. If you enjoyed this episode, please don't forget to subscribe and please leave me a review. And remember, if you'd like to support True Heart Healing, head on over to www.the-daily-ride.com to make a donation. Thank you for joining me today, and until next time, enjoy the ride.